conversations, and so much more. Arrow.net, ARROE.net. Okay, let's do it. Let's pod crash. Episode number 135 is with Dana Schwartz from the podcast Haleywood.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a subject that has been a part of my life. My God, I'm from Montana. Of course, I would know about this, and I also dreamed of one day owning my own town, too.
I can't believe you got to see it firsthand.
Man, it's just one of those things where it's like, I wasn't, Hollywood struck. I was just into the idea of, oh my God, I want to be able to do this. Because I was a kid that used to build cities with his Tonka trucks. So I just thought it was so amazing that it was taking place.
I mean, that was really what was happening. People think like owning a town is something only out of like TV shows like Schitt's Creek, but Bruce Willis really had the money and the power to be able to buy up basically any business that he wanted and then remake it into exactly the type of business he wanted.
I'm glad you brought up Schitt's Creek because I was going to talk about that. Do you think that whole entire season of events and things like that took place because of Haleywood?
I don't know. I think there is sort of this fascination with the idea of like, oh, celebrities buying a town. I think it definitely probably fed into like the ether that inspired something like Schitt's Creek.
Now, was Demi Moore all in on this, or was she just playing along? Because, I mean, I always thought this was a Bruce Willis kind of thing.
It definitely was more Bruce focused, at least in my understanding. But she definitely lived there and owned property. He bought, this is true, a mansion on Main Street, right off Main Street for Demi Moore, not to live in, but just to house and display her extensive doll collection.
See, I need someone in my life then to buy me a big mansion so I can put my elephant collection in there because I totally get that.
Yeah, you just need a house that you can walk through for all your junk.
In a really weird way, I'm in the Carolinas now. This is Jim and Tammy country. I swear to God, this reminds me so much of Jim and Tammy Baker.
Oh, yeah, in terms of the money and power and building a little town.
Yeah. Now, what is it about this airstrip? Because I mean, I don't think there was a problem with, but the locals just didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we try to paint a really even-handed picture in this podcast about how the locals felt and feel today about what Bruce Willis did in Haley. I think at first the reaction was, between fascination and charm. And I think there was some energy of being grateful that he was investing money and revitalizing their Main Street, but without giving away anything of what happens to at the end of the podcast. I think that infatuation with Bruce Willis and celebrity burns off pretty quickly.
What was your draw to create this podcast? First of all, because I remember the last time we talked, I called you a modern day brilliant journalist. And once again, you're proving to the world that how much journalism is a major part of why you do this. You're not yucking it up. You're sharing a story.
Thank you so much. That is high praise. I host another podcast with iHeartRadio called Noble Blood, where I tell stories about royals throughout history. And I think a thing that I'm interested in is money and power and the power of celebrity. And that's something that we can see through centuries of history of royals and nobles. And so when my podcast producer came to me with the idea for this podcast, I was absolutely flabbergasted. Just one, that I hadn't heard of this story before, but also that it touches on so many relevant themes that I'm interested in. I mean, it's a story really about bubbles, the Hollywood bubble, but also this small town bubbles we create for ourselves, about celebrity culture and money and ego. And so it just seemed like a story that is timeless and fascinating, but that so many people, myself included, don't really know about.
Wouldn't you say, though, because of the success of Demi Moore and Bruce Willis, in a way, they were the king and queen, and therefore they built their castle in that city?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like that's also why this was a natural fit for me. I, write about royalty, and they are absolutely Hollywood royalty. I mean, we don't have a monarchy in the United States, obviously, but I think celebrities with their money and social influence might be the closest thing we have.
And isn't it kind of odd that we do have Prince Harry here, and he's not running around acting like he wants to own towns?
Yeah, to the best of my understanding, he's not buying up any towns. I think he and Meghan Markle are just on a big farm in Santa Barbara somewhere, living with their chickens and talking to Oprah.
Now, are the locals in Hailey, Idaho, are they going to sit there and say, Dana, you're reopening a wound here. People are going to want to come here as visitors. Or are they open for that kind of stuff, or do they want to still be their private little village?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the main reasons we were so excited to do this podcast now is so many residents of Hailey were willing to talk and discuss their experiences and what their experience continues to be. No, the people of Hailey, not to speak of them as a monolith, but the many people that we interviewed were very eager to talk about their personal experiences and what had happened. And I think you'll get the taste of plenty of Hailey citizens in this podcast.
So now here's my biggest fear about Hailey, Idaho right now is because one of the reasons why I really don't like going back home to Montana is because the town looks so old. Is that what's happening? Now that Bruce Willis is gone, is Hailey looking old? I mean, or did they keep on that with a great fire of, refurbishing and all that kind of stuff?
I think Hailey, I don't want to speak for Hailey, but I think it is a really beautiful area. I mean, it's just 15 miles outside of that sort of ritzier Sun Valley area. And I think what drew Bruce Willis to it originally was it's, a very developed modern town with that sort of old world charm.
Yeah. But see, I could totally get what he was trying to do. I mean, because look at Shorty's Diner. I mean, this is the one thing that you explain inside the podcast is that, I mean, all they were trying to do was create a place where people could meet. I'm sorry that businesses went out of business, but that is business.
Yeah, exactly. I think Bruce Willis wanted certain things in this town. He wanted a diner. He wanted a bar where he could show up whenever he wanted to play the harmonica. He wanted an office building. He wanted certain properties, and he built them. And I think that it's not so black and white to paint him as a villain when, as you said, he's just opening businesses and revitalizing the town. Yeah. And I think that's what makes this story so interesting, is it's not just a cut and dry story about a Hollywood villain. You raises really interesting questions about development and money and power and celebrity culture as a whole.
You talk about how Bruce would just show up at the bar and stuff like that. That reminds me of what Bill Murray does down in Charleston. And I don't see Bill Murray taking over that town.
No, yeah. I imagine being a celebrity sort of also means that you get that reaction whenever you want. I think what's so specific about what Bruce Willis did was he didn't just want to be a citizen of this town. He wanted everything to be on his terms. If he wanted to show up and start playing harmonica on stage at the bar, he wanted to do it, and he was going to make sure that he could do it because he owned the bar.
Well, look at what he did with the Mint. I mean, B.B. King, Buffalo Springfield. My God, he brought in the superstars into this one little section of the country.
Yeah, and he brought in Hollywood movie premieres to the local movie theater that he also bought. I mean, he, on some level, what he did was amazing. But then you also get to look at this sort of interesting coloring and think, like, was he doing this out of goodwill or ego? And then you can ask yourself, well, does it matter?
What was it about Liberty Theater that really gave him the idea of doing something that was so typical, not the Midwest or the upper Midwest?
Liberty Theater is the small movie theater at the edge of town that he bought. It was a really run-down, old Hollywood-style movie theater. And I think Bruce Willis saw with the Liberty the perfect opportunity to sort of marry these two parts of himself, the Hollywood movie star Bruce Willis and the Bruce who wanted to sort of live this small town dream. So like you said, he bought and revitalized the Liberty Theater, which was already had the bones of sort of a beautiful, glamorous Art Deco theater. And started premiering movies there. I
totally get that because the Carolina Theater here in Charlotte is the same way. I mean, it has that for people that didn't go to the movies back in the 40s and 50s. These theaters were just brilliantly designed. The artwork and everything that was put into it.
I mean, I've been lucky enough to see a few of those old theaters, and they're gorgeous. And I think that also speaks to some of the good work that Bruce Willis was doing in this town, is taking a gem and polishing it and revitalizing it. And I think plenty of people were happy to see Liberty Theater with, the same beautiful chandelier and Art Deco details, but with new seats and open to the public.
So has he changed mentally, or, I mean, is he still buying up towns that we don't know about? I mean, because, it just seems like he's kind of been the mellow guy lately.
Yeah, I think he's someone who shies away from public attention a lot and dislikes and distrusts the press.
Right.
He still, to the best of my understanding, he still owns his property in Haley, Idaho. And I don't want to spoil exactly what happens. You're going to have to listen to the podcast for that. But it is a wild ride getting there.
I would have respected him more if he would have become a part of the city council, or if he would have become mayor of the town as well. Not just a Bruce Wayne style where I'm going to live in my big mansion, but to actually be involved with even the school system.
I think you're exactly right. And he does, to his credit, tries to get involved politically. He does try to avert a nuclear disaster at one point, which is its own small saga. But I think you're right that he, rather than try to work within the system that existed, he sort of tried to buy his way around the system.
Wow. Was he a hard person to work with, do you think, as with being the boss?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Without trying to, disparage a person that I've never met, I think Bruce Willis is sort of famous for having a bit of a temper, being sort of a challenging person to work with. I think he's someone who wants things his way and doesn't quite accept when things don't go his way. At least those are the stories that we get in Haleywood. And if you can imagine, it leads to some interesting conflicts.
Are you expecting a love letter from Bruce or Demi?
I would be thrilled to talk to either of them whenever they're open. As long as we can record it for the podcast, I think that would be great.
So put it up in the universe then. Yeah, okay, the universe has heard it. It's on its way then.
Yeah, shoot me an email, Bruce, Demi.
What did you personally learn from this? Because, come on now. The only thing that a lot of us had were the paparazzi magazines, National Enquirer and stuff like that. You're actually going deep into this.
I learned everything. When my podcast producer, Jason English, came to me saying that they were making this podcast, I knew absolutely nothing about this story. I, without giving myself away, I was born in 1993, so I wasn't exactly around when this was happening. I was around, but not like mentally checked in to Bruce Willis. And so it felt like I was like an archaeologist or something as I learned more and more about this strange thing. And it's been fascinating to hear from so many people who were directly affected by it.
One of the things that's great about this story is that it proves the American dream is alive. You can do it, but you have to be able to stick to it.
You can definitely do it. Bruce Willis started as a bartender in New York City and ended up being the de facto owner of a town in Idaho.
Now, you know how businesses are, especially when it comes to, city rules and taxes and stuff like that. It's like I think Amazon is in Charlotte because they probably gave him some big tax break. What about Bruce? Did he get tax breaks by taking all this stuff? Do you know?
Oh, yeah. Well, so that's also part of the problem is Bruce Willis is investing so much money and time and I think in his mind, his celebrity into the town. And he sort of comes to sort of expect, I'll say special treatment, but he probably would have said a little quid pro quo in terms of things. In the podcast, in later episodes, we get into major conflicts Bruce Willis will get into with the city, including issues over septic tank hookups, including liquor license laws. He tries to install heated sidewalks, and that doesn't go over so well. I think there are definitely the challenges of Bruce Willis's celebrity butting heads with the small town rules and regulations in ways that he doesn't appreciate.
I would love to just, like you said, if you could get an interview with any of them, because I would love to hear their side of the story and the vision, because, the way you're describing it is still keeping that fantasy very much alive in my heart. It's like, God, I want to do this, but I don't want to do it Bruce's way.
Yeah, we, in the podcast, we hear from a ton of Haley residents, city council people, former politicians, all to give us sort of an accurate and colorful picture of what really happened. the on the ground details.
Did they talk about, when the rumors started to happen? I mean, were they excited about it? I mean, because first of all, with the diner, Shorty's Diner, I mean, if I would have heard that diner was going to be revitalized and stuff like that, as a citizen of that town, man, I would have been there all over the place.
Absolutely. I think as the story of Bruce Willis moving to their town came out, people were excited. I mean, he was the biggest action movie star in the world at that point. And as I sort of alluded to, this was an area that wasn't a stranger to celebrities. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Clint Eastwood both had properties nearby. Right. So it was sort of normal and fun for, celebrities to be nearby. But I think where they started to get concerned was when this anonymous company, which they didn't know was Bruce Willis at the time, started buying up all these properties. I think they were worried that it was going to be, big corporate chains infiltrating their small town. And then gradually their love affair with Bruce Willis hit the rocks.
Wow. Renee Zellweger, didn't she team up with a guy recently? I mean, maybe a few years ago. They were going to rebuild a town too. They were going to buy the theater, and I kept trying to compare that. Oh my God, here we go again. The people get money. They think they can take over a village.
Oh my gosh, I haven't heard of that. I have to look into that. One thing that was fascinating to me is that, my other podcast, Noble Blood, I write about royals and history. To me, buying a town and trying to sort of remake it into your perfect little fantasy is sort of this interesting throwback to what Marie Antoinette did at Versailles with the Petit Trianon, which was the little mini farm village that she built outside of Versailles so she could sort of play peasant farmer. I think it's a similar sort of fantasy.
The interesting thing about this is, as big as Bruce Willis and Demi Moore were, they were small town tycoons. Now, in radio, to have small town attached to anything is like, I ain't anything if I'm small town. But they were small town tycoons.
That's it exactly. I mean, Bruce Willis, he shied away from the press and I think shied away from his fame to some degree. And he was specifically looking for somewhere that was a small town where he didn't feel part of that Hollywood, LA, New York bubble.
That's so funny that, because didn't Bruce know that when you go to a small town, everybody knows your news? I mean, Mildred down the street is going to know every time you use the bathroom, because that's what they do in small towns.
Oh, yeah. And Bruce Willis was not happy about that part of small town life. He is someone who is intensely private and wanted to buy all of these businesses, but only on his terms and without anyone knowing.
So what's next? Because I mean this podcast is we're going to live it, we're going to experience it, but Dana's not going to be silent when it comes to her journalism. What can you talk about anything else that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I have the ongoing podcast Noble Blood. Yep. That's every other week. And I have a brand new novel coming out in January. It's called Anatomy, a Love Story. It sort of hits those that historical itch for me. It takes place in 19th century Edinburgh at the dawn of surgery, back when surgery was basically a man with a knife. So that's a novel that comes out in January and is up for pre-order if anyone's interested. And I'm working on 2 new books coming out 2023. See,
you are proving the true roots of podcasting. And what I mean by that is that it all started in the mid part of the 1980s because the writers found a place to have a voice. And you're right along there with that you are a writer, you are a journalist, and you are sharing stories.
That's everything I try to do. Thank you so much.
You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you, Dana.
Arrow, it was such a pleasure. I would love to come back.
Well, you be brilliant, okay?
Thank you. You too.